Recently, a shocking incident occurred at the famous Gyeongbokgung Palace in Seoul, South Korea. A pair of tourists, suspected to be from China, were filmed urinating side by side beneath the ancient stone walls of the Joseon dynasty's main palace. The video, once exposed, has caused widespread shock in society. According to South Korean media JTBC's program Incident Class Leader, the incident occurred at noon on November 10th, near the stone wall by the Sinmu Gate of Gyeongbokgung Palace. Witnesses recorded footage showing a middle-aged man squatting in the bushes to relieve himself, holding toilet paper to take care of his needs. A patrolling police officer noticed the unusual behavior and immediately intervened. A woman dressed in white pants was also squatting beside the man in a similar position. After a while, she stood up and left, leaving an unknown stain on her white pants. The man then staggered out of the bushes. The entire scene was captured on video. The whistleblower recalled, at that time, dozens of Chinese tourists were visiting Gyeongbokgung Palace. This couple was likely part of the group. It was later learned that the man in the controversial video was a Chinese tourist in his 70s. At 3:30 p.m. on November 10th, the man was fined 50,000 Korean won, approximately 34.4 USD according to the law. However, the woman in the video was not penalized. The specific reasons have not been disclosed. Gyeongbokgung Palace, built in 1395 during the Joseon dynasty, is the largest of the dynasty's 5 royal palaces and a major historical landmark. It is also one of Seoul's most popular tourist attractions. The uncivilized behavior at the site created a stark contrast to the royal atmosphere of the palace, which left many astonished. The person who uploaded the original footage shared on social media that the video was filmed by a friend in the afternoon and sent to him. He expressed strong dissatisfaction in the post, writing, "I can't believe this actually happened in front of my friend. I completely can't accept it." The post received numerous comments from South Korean netizens, including, "This behavior is beyond imagination," and "We have so many public toilets in our country." As early as 2018, the Seoul city government announced regular inspections and management of the city's 20,554 public toilets. An official document noted that the city has 20,554 public toilets, 8,000 staff, and weekly rechecks of key locations. In other words, finding a toilet in a first-tier city like Seoul has never been a problem. The public urination incident on that day is hard to justify as a lack of available toilets. However, investigations revealed that this was not the first time Chinese tourists were accused of urinating in public in South Korea. On October 6 to October 7, a netizen posted about witnessing a woman with a child urinating at Yeongmyeori Coast in Jeju City. The netizen described, "Used wet wipes were left by the side and later floated into the sea." Yeongmyeori Coast is a national natural monument in South Korea, named for its coastline resembling the head of a dragon. The netizen speculated that the person involved was likely a Chinese tourist. These two incidents, occurring in close proximity and at popular tourist sites with dense crowds, have made it easier to generalize individual misbehavior as a group label. After the THAAD incident in 2019, tourism between China and South Korea cooled for a while, but gradually picked up after the pandemic. According to data from the Korea Tourism Organization, the number of Chinese visitors to South Korea surged to 8.2 million in 2023. However, this rise in visitors was accompanied by an increase in uncivilized behavior. Some tourists were seen shouting loudly on the streets of Seoul, others were caught vandalizing and even climbing on locations used in Korean dramas. Since September, South Korea temporarily allowed Chinese tourists to enter without a visa, leading to a large influx of Chinese visitors. Recently, young Chinese tourists have also sparked a Seoul syndrome trend on platforms like Douyin and Xiaohongshu, sharing their travel impressions after visiting South Korea. According to reports from South Korean media outlets such as Seoul Economy and the National Daily, the Korea Tourism Organization's Data Lab released data on November 15, showing that after the COVID-19 pandemic and the recovery of the tourism industry, the number of Chinese tourists visiting South Korea has been steadily increasing. It is estimated that in 2024, around 4.6 million Chinese tourists visited South Korea, double the 2 million recorded in 2023. Major Chinese social platforms have also sparked a Seoul travel trend, with many young Chinese travelers sharing positive reviews of their trips to South Korea, such as receiving help from locals with directions or capturing beautiful travel memories of the Han River or Namsan Tower. Nonetheless, while Chinese tourists are drawn to South Korea, the visa exemption policy has led to rising anti-China sentiment in Korean society. Recently, the number of anti-China banners on the streets has dramatically increased. On September 29, a conservative group in Seoul held a rally against the trial visa exemption for Chinese tourists. By 5 p.m., about 270 people had participated, holding signs with slogans such as "Oppose visa exemption for 30 million Chinese tourists" and "Ensure the safety of our citizens before attracting Chinese tourists." The rising anti-China sentiment on the streets of South Korea is not without cause. Political disputes are part of the issue, but more directly, the stimulus has been the recurring uncivilized moments that have appeared on camera. Ironically, these behaviors are amplified abroad, largely because they are already common in China and not something that suddenly appears when abroad. Aside from South Korea, the extent to which Chinese people let loose in their country is more remarkable. On November 17, a man was seen defecating publicly in the grass at Tiananmen Square. Some netizens commented under the video saying, "Defecating at Tiananmen? It's definitely a Chinese intangible cultural heritage." Another netizen remarked, "Now I really believe China is a democracy. They can even defecate anywhere." On November 11, at Metro Line 3 in Nanning City, a man wearing a business jacket and holding a water cup suddenly came to a pillar, pulled down his pants, and defecated. The process lasted about 30 seconds, and he left without cleaning up. Surveillance footage showed that the man was calm and left nonchalantly after defecating. On January 15, in Suzhou City, a man on Shihu West Road amidst traffic took off his pants and defecated in the street. In response, some netizens commented, "Don't blame everything on prejudice. These moments of misbehavior don't only happen abroad. They also repeatedly occur in our own country. Impressions are built over time. Rather than saying we're being discriminated against, we should admit we still need a lesson in public etiquette." Now, let's zoom out to a broader perspective. Why are Chinese tourists so often labeled as uncivilized? Reports suggest that this is not racial discrimination, but the result of accumulated instances. Take a recent example. In February 2025, Japan's Kyoto reported that with the surge of Chinese tourists, there were traffic jams, worsening hygiene, and even tourists shouting anti-Japan slogans in front of temples. Kyoto's ancient temples like Golden Pavilion and Kiyomizu-dera Temple are meant to be peaceful places of Zen. Yet they were disrupted by tourists wielding selfie sticks and littering. Another example occurred in 2023 at the British Museum, where signs in Chinese reading "No touching artifacts" were posted. Why? Because Chinese tourists repeatedly violated the rule by touching exhibits. Some even removed their shoes and put their feet up near Tower Bridge. These incidents might sound like jokes, but after the laughter comes the awkwardness. In Thailand, a popular destination for Chinese tourists, the number of visitors surpassed 10 million in 2024. However, the bad news kept coming. At Pattaya Beach, some tourists defecated in public at the Grand Palace in Bangkok. Some ignored the rule of removing shoes before entering and walked in with shoes on. And at the Egyptian pyramids, some attempted to climb and take photos, causing protests from local guides. Against this global backdrop, every action of Chinese tourists abroad becomes more prone to being magnified as a reflection of national image. In the past 2 years, the Pew Research Center's cross-national surveys have almost sounded the alarm for China's global image. The latest report, released in 2025, showed that in 25 countries surveyed, only 36% of people had a positive opinion of China, while 54% viewed it negatively. More notably, this low favorability is especially evident in high-income countries. In mature democracies like Europe, the US, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, positive evaluations of China often drop to 30% or even lower. In recent years, the negative perception of China's system, behavioral norms, and etiquette remains unchanged among an increasing number of respondents. What's even more concerning is that while these views have somewhat softened among younger generations, they remain relatively low. In other words, even among the more open-minded, diverse, and globally connected youth, there have been no significant shift in their overall impression of China. But here's the problem. Why do these uncivilized behaviors keep happening? And why are they repeatedly magnified abroad? Where does the true cause lie? Digging deeper, the issue extends beyond individuals. Education failure is key. China's education system, though seemingly strict and focused on discipline, has long trained children to be score machines, while really teaching them to be modern citizens who can live decently in public places. In today's schools, civilization education is often superficial, limited to slogans. Whether it's speeches during flag-raising ceremonies, propaganda on wars, or essays about civilized students memorized in language classes. But these lessons never truly enter children's daily lives. No one teaches them how to remain quiet in libraries, how to queue on public buses, how to maintain hygiene in public restrooms, or how to respect cultural relics in history museums. The so-called morality and ethic classes in schools are meant to cultivate students' moral and social responsibility, but in reality, they serve more to teach students to be obedient. This is why many people bluntly say morality education is essentially patriotic brainwashing. It's the Chinese Communist Party's indoctrination class. If we look at Chinese tourists over 70 years old, we find that their uncivilized behavior is not just a personal habit, but a deep imprint left by the era under the CCP's rule. The generation born in the 1940s and the 1950s grew up during Mao Zedong's era. From the Great Famine to the Cultural Revolution, the main theme of society was simply survival. During that time, the CCP's governance focused on political movements and class struggle, with little attention given to public civility. In rural areas, most toilets were open pits swarming with flies and mosquitoes, with no concept of cleanliness. Many regions had no waste disposal systems, and littering was not seen as uncivilized, but just a way of life. Cities had outdated sewage systems, and sanitation habits were extremely basic. More importantly, during that era, the public had no concept of public space. In such an environment, it was impossible for people to develop the public manners that modern society requires because civility needs stability, safety, systems, and education, none of which were available at that time. More deeply, the CCP never provided real civic education to this generation. From a young age, they were taught politicized ideological education, loyalty to the collective, obedience to the leader, and task implementation, but never learned public rules, social responsibilities, or cross-cultural etiquette. As a result, when they grew up, they naturally lacked dining etiquette and awareness of public order and cross-cultural sensitivity because these skills were never taught. So, when these individuals from the 1940s and 1950s finally had the chance to travel abroad, they carried with them survival logic shaped over decades. The quicker you grab, the smarter you are. Public space has no owner, and rules change depending on the situation. This behavior was tolerated at home, but once abroad, facing mature systems and sensitive cultural environments, all the gaps became immediately apparent. Thus, uncivilized behavior is never just a personal mistake of a tourist. It is the result of decades of education structure, social environment, and national governance. On the other hand, many long-standing issues within China's domestic social structure have also led to today's uncivilized phenomena. A clear example is China's public facilities, especially its toilet system. After the urban toilet revolution, the number and cleanliness of public restrooms in first-tier cities have greatly improved. But in vast rural areas, suburban areas, and remote regions, the reality of few distant and dirty toilets still exists. Many people grew up in environments with poor toilet conditions, which led to the habit of finding a hidden corner to solve the problem in emergencies. Cultural factors are also crucial. Traditional Chinese culture emphasizes restraint and reserve, but due to the Communist Party's destruction of traditional culture, this restraint has not genuinely extended to public space awareness. Instead, under the collective influence of modern society, it has transformed into another form of herd mentality. In Chinese tourist attractions, when someone cuts in line, litters, or ignores the queue, bystanders often don't intervene but silently join in. Once this go-with-the-flow misbehavior becomes group behavior, it snowballs and grows larger. When traveling abroad, a group of people will naturally bring these domestic default behaviors with them. Seeing others raise their voices leads them to do the same. Seeing others misbehave makes them think it's no big deal. In other words, the uncivilized behavior of Chinese people overseas is not a sudden behavioral change, but the amplification of long accumulated habits in a foreign environment. Shanghai scholar Zhu Dake believes the lack of public civility is closely related to long-term class struggle education, treating everyone as an imagined enemy and viewing all daily life events as part of class struggle. For enemies, there's no need for politeness. Revolution is not a dinner party. This revolutionary ethic has not disappeared in the 21st century. Rather, it has transformed into the brutal logic of social competition under resource scarcity. The problem is not a lack of education, but an overemphasis on education, particularly struggle education. Other Chinese experts pointed out that the most sensitive and ironic part of this uncivilized issue is the CCP's dual face on the topic of civilization. In recent years, the government has heavily promoted the concept of civilized China, launching various green plans, such as the 2023 to 2025 Domestic Tourism Enhancement Plan, which sounds impressive. Cultivate civilized tourism benchmarks, establish civilized role models, and create civilized cultural scenes, while continuously issuing civilized travel tips and civilized travel proposals. However, when the camera moves from the promotional videos to reality, the gap is immediately visible. These so-called civilization initiatives often remain on paper and television, while the actual execution is chaotic. The deeper absurdity lies in the fact that the CCP attempts to use propaganda to replace actual civilization building, treating the National Image Project as civilizational progress. It believes civilization is something that can be publicized, achieved through posters, slogans, and catchphrases. But civilization has never been mere decoration. It is the product of internal qualities and external systems. A society cannot achieve civilization with a few slogans, nor can it fill the gap in public education with nationalism. Chinese tourist misbehavior abroad is the most direct counterattack against this false false civilization system. No matter how glorious the propaganda, how loud the slogans, as long as reality doesn't change, behavior will expose the truth. Looking back at the Gyeongbokgung Palace incident, it's just the tip of the iceberg. However, it serves as a reminder to the world that civilization is not innate. It must be cultivated. The online backlash is not a bad thing. It is a warning about the results of the CCP's decades of hollow education.